If you would, take your Bibles and turn to Matthew 16. A little known, little talked about passage, or not. This morning I want to pose just a broad question. A fully loaded question that I want to give you some ideas to start thinking through. The question is this: what does Jesus want from his people, from his church, from his community? If you profess faith in Jesus, what are you supposed to do then? Because depending on where you're at in space and time, somebody might say, well, that's all you need to do. Good, I'm seeing some head shakes at me. That's what I like to see. That's not all you're supposed to do, but what are you supposed to do after you believe? We had baptisms last week. We had 3 people be baptized. This morning I had 2 other people ask me about baptism, so we probably got 2 more coming in the not too distant future. We're going to make that happen as quickly as possible. So for those of you who are baptized believers, you've made a profession of faith and that profession has led you to baptism, what do you do now? Well, I was thinking about that this week. And there's an interesting story in Matthew 16 where we're going to start in verse 13 and we're going to read down through 28. We're not going to talk about everything this morning. We're going to talk about verses 13 through 20 this morning. Next week we're going to talk about 21 through 28. But we're going to read them both this week and next week. But we're going to try and answer a question from Jesus' example to try and figure out what does he want. And I want to take the story this direction. Jesus the Messiah is going to initiate a direct fight against evil by invading their territory, and he's going to empower and expect his church to do the same. What Jesus wants from his church is to be active and to take initiative in the fight against evil in this world, trusting that his power will make his people, victorious in the end. So to this end, Matthew is going to tell the story, recording a series of Jesus initiating certain things that will ultimately be the beginning of his actual fight in Jerusalem, climaxing in his death. To achieve victory over intelligent evil powers in Jerusalem by dying, Jesus is going to initiate a trip north to Caesarea Philippi. He's going to initiate a conversation with the disciples, and he's going to initiate a new community built on a rock. All of this is leading towards the cross. And in between this story and his march towards Jerusalem, there's this little interlude that you know very well called the Transfiguration. Now, we're not going to discuss the Transfiguration, but I do want to say a few things on it, and this is what I want to say. The crucifixion was a trap to get intelligent evil to overplay their hand and destroy themselves. You can think of the cross like that. Well, I want you to think of the Transfiguration as Jesus baiting the trap, turning around and marching on evil territories and then saying, look at me, evil, this is who I am, and then marching straight down to Jerusalem to die so that evil could be defeated by his resurrection. The power of death could be undone. This story is in Jesus' mind, living in light of these kinds of events. Let's read the passage. Verse 13, Matthew says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But what about you? He asked. Who do you say I am? And after probably as much silence as this, Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. Peter took him aside and rebuked him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this will never happen to you." Peter turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to all the disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. For what good will it be for somebody to gain the whole world yet forfeit their life, their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul, their life? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels. And then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Now, we're going to tackle a lot of this over the next 2 weeks, but today we're going to focus on verse 13 through 20, and we're going to try and put the story in context and answer the question of what. What does Jesus want from his people? And the first clue that we get to that is that he is initiating a trip up north to this area called Caesarea Philippi. Now, we're going to return to the end of this later, so I'm going to skip the details of what Caesarea Philippi is about and its importance for the moment. The one thing that I would have you do, though, is at some point you should pull out your phone, not now, and you should Google Caesarea Philippi and see if they bring up pictures and Google images of a big rock formation. Because there's a big rock formation to pagan gods there. In fact, it's named after Caesar, who in this time was to be worshipped as God. Philip was one of Herod's the Great's sons, so he's kind of saying, hey, I'm on Rome's side, let's name this place after Caesar, but also I'm going to ride Caesar's coattail and name it after myself and Caesar. But Google it and just visually get the pictures in your head of the big rock formation that is there. Because this big rock formation is right where Jesus is having this conversation. Okay? We'll come back to that more later. But what I really want to get to is that after initiating this trip and standing in front of a big rock formation, he initiates this conversation in verse 13. Who do the people say the Son of Man is? The Son of Man is the Daniel 7 character, this great, glorious man, human, who comes from earth into God's presence and receive all glory and authority in heaven and earth. You know, the way Matthew closes his gospel. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And Jesus is using this as his self-title. Somehow he wants people to think of him, or he thinks of himself, is perhaps more accurate, as the Son of Man, that great, glorious Daniel 7 figure. But if that's how he thinks of himself, how are other people thinking about it? So he asked this question, who do the people think I am? What do the masses think? What does a good teacher do? He asks questions. So Jesus is prompting the 12 to think about what the public is saying about him. You know, the question is really, what does current popular opinion say about me? What's the hip, cool word about me at the water cooler? What are the kids talking about online about me? What's the hot goss? What have you heard? And ultimately, this question is not important. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's not entirely unimportant, but popular opinion has never created truth, not for one single moment. Has truth been dependent on enough people understanding and proclaiming it, which is important. Who Jesus is, what he has come to do, is not contingent on what the masses' perception of him actually is. No ministry of God ever is. But he poses the question, so the disciples give the answer. Verse 14, John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, anybody? Bueller? The populace thinks you're a prophet, but there's no real consensus onto what prophet you are or what kind of prophet you're like. That's verse 14's answer to this question. John the Baptist was dead by this point. Herod thought he was raised from the dead, and what he was hearing about Jesus was John the Baptist. So that's the John portion of it. Elijah, he's a good candidate because he's supposed to show up before the Messiah. Nobody but Jesus ever really tied John to the Elijah figure that Malachi foretold of. So word is that you might be the Elijah figure we've been waiting for before the Messiah shows up. Still, other people think you're like Jeremiah. I mean, you're going around weeping and crying over Jerusalem while proclaiming its destruction. So some people have seen parallels between you and Jeremiah, and still other people are just making whatever parallels they can understand. So people saw all sorts of various parallels to the prophets of the Old Testament and to Jesus. And you know what? They're not wrong to see that. Jesus is very much a prophetic figure enacting prophetic works. He's doing what plenty of the prophets before him did. He is operating in that line. So the people, the masses, are on some level on the right track to see these connections that create the continuity between the old and what Jesus is doing that we call the new. Jesus' preaching and ministry is prophetic, but ultimately, as usual, the crowds, the masses, the popular consensus is actually missing the deeper point and the deeper truths. And this leads Jesus to ask the real question he wants to ask to his disciples and get at the real question and answer that he's initiated this conversation for. So verse 15 is trying to initiate a thoughtful answer. What about you? You 12 guys. You 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 100-something people. Who do you think Jesus is? It's a question you need to think about and ponder and answer for yourself. Ultimately, everybody has an answer. But, like a self-conscious, like a teacher asking a question to a bunch of self-conscious students who have never thought about the question and answer, I imagine it got real quiet real quick when he poses this question. Any of you who are teachers in Sunday school, you ask a question and then 30 seconds of dead air go by, you know the thought. And I think that's probably what I would, in my sanctified imagination, perceive is happening there. And then finally, 1 out of the 12 men standing there, Simon, he alone gives an honest answer to the question. So now, Simon Peter is going to initiate an answer in verse 16. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. To paraphrase what Peter is communicating, his answer means you're not merely another prophet. You are the Messiah. You're on a whole other scale. You're the Christ, which is just the Greek version of Messiah. Your authority is beyond that of any man, even the prophets of old whom God authorized to speak, even all the kings of this world. I believe you to be the one the prophets were talking about and looking forward to, the king who's going to come and be greater than everyone, the Messiah. That's who I believe you are. Peter is saying all of that to Jesus in this moment. And Jesus replies in verse 17, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. That's the first part of Jesus' response. And to summarize it in this ongoing conversation, Jesus says, absolutely correct. Ding, 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 you win, Simon. And you didn't figure this out because of the crowds or popular opinion. Humans, flesh and blood, didn't reveal this to you. You're not the one guy who figured it out where the crowds failed. That's not what happened here, Peter. God helped you understand this. God revealed it to you, which is not something he has done for the crowds, which is why they're still floundering and trying to guess who you are, what you're doing, and what it all means. Now, that's kind of the easy part of the answer, but verses 18 and 19 are very, very confusing and have just been troubling for the church for 2,000 years, but let's read them, and let's solve 2,000 years of church problems here in the next 5 minutes. I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. To begin with, in verse 18, after Jesus has affirmed Peter's faith in him, his statement of faith, and said, "You're right," Jesus now turns around and says, "That's who you think I am, and you're right. Now let me tell you who you are." He initiates a new identity for Peter, and through Peter, he's initiating a new community. Now that you understand me, let me help you understand your identity and your own. So, this passage has been discussed, it's been dissected, and it's been destroyed in many ways for centuries. But here Jesus is laying out a series of ideas that cannot be divorced from their Old Testament context if you want to properly understand them. Jesus, a prophet like the prophets of old, but something so much more, is doing something that God has done in the Old Testament to a new flavor here in a new way. What Jesus is saying is that Simon, the rock Peter, sorry Dwayne Johnson, is the beginning of a new humanity that Jesus is going to make through himself. Through me, real new humanity is coming. And Peter, you're the first. This idea goes all the way back to Genesis, to the beginning with the creation of Adam, when God first began with humanity. And it also goes back to Abram being renamed Abraham and Jacob being renamed Israel. Let's talk about it and think it through. First off, Peter, that name. Peter is the masculine Greek form of the Greek word Petra, which is a feminine form, meaning rock. People make a lot of stuff out of this of saying, well, the rock is Jesus. I mean, we just sang, "On Christ the solid rock we stand." We don't sing, "On Peter the solid rock we stand." But that doesn't work because it's a Greek play on words. The fact that Peter or Petros it's a masculine, you can't call a man Petra in Greek. It doesn't work. You have to change it to a masculine form if you're identifying a man as a rock. Peter is the rock spoken of here. It's not Jesus himself, nor is it what you will often hear, the declaration that Jesus is the Messiah. Important as that is to the context and related to it as it is, the play on words in Greek only makes sense if Peter is the rock under consideration. Now keep in mind, where are they at? Caesarea Philippi. Google it. Note the big rock formation there. He knows what he's doing, and he's having this conversation here intentionally. What does it mean for Peter to be a rock, not Jesus? It's actually so simple that it just kind of goes over our heads as modern readers. And as loaded as this passage is with all sorts of church discussion for 2,000 years, the basic idea just goes over our heads and we miss it. A rock is just a foundation on which you're going to build things further. It's a foundation. That's the idea. Think of Plymouth Rock. What is it, 1620? The Mayflower lands here. Oh, I got it right. Hey, I'm not good with dates. Either that or we're all wrong. Plymouth Rock, the Mayflower lands, and they dedicate their society there, and they call it Plymouth Rock, right? But the idea, even there, in not so ancient past, is, hey, we're going to build something new here. This is just the beginning. The Greek here, the play on words, and what Jesus is doing, based on where he's doing it, is all supposed to telecast, I'm building something new here. Peter is in this moment, professing that his faith in Jesus as nothing less than the Messiah, and the Messiah, Jesus, is going to turn around and say, I'm going to give you an identity as the first, the building stone, the thing on which my new community is going to go on being built. And the gates of Hades, or hell, or the underworld, or whatever it is not going to vanquish it, it's not going to stop it, it's not going to conquer it. And it's starting right here, right now. Your profession of me, I'm telling you that you're the rock based on your profession, and we're going to build out from here. which is why, in keeping with every time God does this, he gives power and authority away. It's the starting point. It's the beginning. You need power. You need control on some level. The gates of hell can't conquer you if you have the power to bind and loose. So he uses this language. So Jesus is indicating his messianic intention to build a new community, which is the first time the word church comes up here, ecclesia. He's building all this, bringing it all together. But God has done this in the past with ancient patriarchs, giving them new names, giving them new identities. He changes Abraham's name. Abram. God divorces the nations at the Tower of Babel. They build the Tower of Babel, and they declare in building this tower, we will serve any God that's willing to come down our little tower, join us, and help us rebuild this pre-flood world. And so Yahweh says, nope, we're not doing that. He judges them, and he says, none of you get to be my people anymore. And then he turns around, and he immediately starts rebuilding humanity by calling Abram out of this Babel system in Genesis. And he gives Abram the opportunity to know him as God, to be his God, if Abram will deny all the other gods and say, you be my sole God, and you let me be your sole God, and I will turn you into a great nation. And I'll bless the whole world through you. So Abram says yes, where everybody else says no to Yahweh. So Yahweh makes a covenant with him, and when he makes the covenant in chapter 15, God says, to seal this, you're no longer Abram. You are now Abraham, meaning you're the father, because my intentions in chapter 12, you have accepted them, you've agreed to it, so we're binding this agreement now, and you are now a new person as I do something new through you. Your bloodline will bless the world somehow. And then 2 generations later, Abraham's grandson Jacob, meaning heel grabber, is renamed Israel, he who wrestles with God, by the angel of Yahweh, who may or may not be the same person who's renaming Peter here. Why? Because the community of God would come through his bloodline. Do you see the pattern throughout history? Abraham and Jacob are not the only people that this happens to. Every time that God wants to do something new and calling a new person out and helping them change their loyalty to him, giving a new name or a new identity is part of the story. So Jesus is acting out very similar events. He's renaming a man in light of the faith that he's put in him, in God. And Jesus is indicating through this, I'm once again starting over. I'm once again making something new. The same way that my father did in Abraham's time and Jacob's time. The same way he did at Sinai. And the same way that after exile we started over. We started over again and again. But this is the last time we're starting over. For the last time, we will build a community that will not end or cease or fail. The Big C Church. As the Messiah, he is going to rebuild God's community around himself, and it starts here with Peter, the foundation stone, the building upon which everything else is going to be constructed, because he's the first to express faith directly in Jesus. And from this moment on, Jesus is going to establish a growing community for those who have faith in him. Peter is the rock as the first, but he's not going to be the last. So we need to ask this question, does this give Peter a place of preeminence in the community? And the answer is yes, but. When Jesus says, I will give you the keys to the kingdom, and authorizes Peter the ability to bind and loose, the word you all the way through this verse is singular. He's not talking to anybody but Peter when he says this. Peter, the rock upon which more will be built, is therefore the initial one invested with the same authority as the Messiah himself. Messiah is telling rock, hey, I'm going to give you my own power. And your choices and your decisions are going to hold so much weight that heaven themselves is going to affirm or deny them, whatever they are. This, however, is not a medieval Catholic idea. This is an Old Testament idea, something that's related to new humanity being created. When God first creates humanity in Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28, he says, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule. Let them have authority over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, the wild animals, the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over all the creatures that I have made." From the moment he first sets out to initiate creating humankind, and he will do this over and over again throughout the Old Testament, when he brings and starts over a new people group, he always invests that group with authority at some point. Peter's investment here is like the rock. He's just the beginning. It's the same when the Spirit comes upon Moses and then he brings the people up out of Egypt, and then God turns around and says, I'll take my Spirit that's on you and I'll put it on all these other people, and we'll build the tabernacle, and then my people will worship me. And Joshua seems to think that that's a bad thing, and he says, no, let it, Moses, I'm not upset about this, let it happen. The Spirit needs to be out there amongst everyone. It's the same picture. God invests his Spirit, his power, and his authority on his image bearers in this creation. That's you and I. Humanity can and always has been capable of making free choices about how we're going to go about doing God's will. In Genesis, he plants a garden. He says, what I want for you is to extend the borders of this garden until it fills the whole land. He doesn't tell them how to do that. Adam and Eve have full freedom of choice to say, all right, how many kids are we going to have? How many hands are we going to need to do this? Where are we going to go north, south, east, west first? Which way are we going to work? And God's sitting over there, not telling them, I would like to see you go south. He's not telling them those details. He's giving them freedom to make choices. And despite our rebellion and our exile from Eden, we do remain invested with God's authority as his image bearers. We can and do get to make free choice. So what Jesus is doing here is prophetically acting out the same story of Israel over again, which he does a lot in different ways in books like Matthew and the other Gospels. But he's trying to say that humanity is going to be rebuilt one last final time through me, the Messiah. And it's starting with this initial rock, Peter, and the community as a whole is going to possess his authority. And you can understand this if you actually follow the whole context of the book of Matthew, because only a few chapters later in 18:18, when he brings this language up about binding and loosing again, he says, I'll give you the ability to bind and loose, and your choices will hold weight in heaven. There, the Greek pronoun is plural, and he's talking in the context of all of the church through the 12. So this is a starting point. Even before the book of Matthew is done, let alone the book of Acts, Peter is going to have to obviously share authority and power. That is not to be a surprise. What is to begin here with Peter in Matthew 16, even by chapter 18, let alone the true founding of the church at Pentecost, is extended to the whole church so that everybody and every single person can play their role. This is always God's intention. The God of the Bible wants to share power and give it away. He gives it away to his celestial family. He gives it away to his terrestrial family. They get to choose and make decisions. He gives it away so that we have the capacity to, in being his image bearers, make decisions and choices and share his authority in this world. Nope, Peter is not a pope who gets to rule over the church with sole pontific authority. That is going way beyond the boundaries of this verse or the book of Matthew. It is anachronistically reading ideas that existed centuries later back into this first century text, while simultaneously ignoring the entire Hebraic Old Testament ideas that are in the text. You can ask the question, so I'm supposed to be sharing in his divine power. I'm supposed to be sharing some authority here that he's given to this initial rock. How do I go about that? How do I get power, if that's the right word? Authority, choice. And the answer is you initiate belief that Jesus is the Messiah, as Peter has. Can you say that you have actually done that? Going back to the baptisms, we had 3 people last week actually say that they're doing that. But, okay, now we come back to the whole point of this sermon. So what does he want? If that's all that he wants, you don't have to do anything else. But that's not all that he wants. That's how you get in to the community of what he really and truly wants. What do we do now that we, as part of his new humanity, are invested with his power? How do we use it? What are we supposed to do with it? Because in verse 20 he says he ordered the disciples not to tell anybody about him. Somehow I think that's not the point. The point to the disciples here is to say, you're not yet ready for this. Now that you know I'm the Messiah, now that I've begun rebuilding you as a community, you're not yet ready to do the job. You'll get ready when you actually understand what it means for me to be the Messiah. That's what we're going to talk about next week. How do you properly use the authority? But in order to ask those questions, where verse 21 through 28 play out that idea, we still have to understand, what are we supposed to do with the power? I want to pose to you that this portion of Scripture portrays Jesus and his followers eventually doing what Jesus did. Go on the offensive against evil, invade their territory, break down and ruin their strongholds of control and power over people, and do it intentionally. Initiate the process, as Jesus here is initiating this trip, initiating this conversation, initiating this new community, initiating pouring out his power. Take it and initiate the ongoing purpose. Fight evil. Why do I suggest this? Location, location, location. He is in Caesarea Philippi. Now, I don't have time to unpack what's the importance of Caesarea Philippi in great detail. It's enough to say a few things on it like this. First off, in the Jewish day, and Googling these pictures will help you understand this, they thought that Caesarea Philippi and this big rock formation and all of this is the gateway to hell in the underworld. That hell on earth is found first and foremost here in Caesarea Philippi, and if you went further north, the mountain ranges of Mount Hermon. In the Jewish perception, this is the gates to hell, which he has mentioned will not have power to stop his church. Conceptually speaking, hell on earth is located exactly where he's having this conversation. That's the point, and that's why he's here. There's a whole manifold reasons for all of this, but that's the point. It was into this area, this territory, that Jesus would very shortly, in about 1 week, go up on a mountain in this area of Mount Hermon, and he would be transfigured. Not so Peter, James, and John could see him, but so that the intelligent evil powers that were conceived to dwell here in this world could see him, so that he could bait the trap, and they would come for him in Jerusalem, take his life that he would willingly lay down, and make resurrection, new life possible in this physical world where death destroys everything. This is it. This is the peanut butter on the mousetrap, the transfiguration. And what this conversation is the beginning of the new community that's going to come about from this. 1 Corinthians 2:8 says, none of the rulers of this age understood the crucifixion. If they had understood the crucifixion, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. If intelligent evil powers, the powers of hell, the satanic spiritual warfare things that we're always talking about, understood that by killing Jesus, they were going to enact their own broken power and people were going to be set free from them, they wouldn't have done it. So the Old Testament is very cryptic and confusing about what the Messiah is going to do. And the crowds can't figure it out because nobody understands it. The disciples can't really figure it out. That's why they're arguing about it. Until it actually happens, then they can start understanding it. So Jesus is initiating this trip into the very territory of hell on earth, initiating this conversation, initiating a new community, and investing his community with power so that the gates of hell, these demonic powers, will not overcome it. The question is, how do we read the gates of hell language? If you Google the picture and you see it, you might actually see some gates in some of the photos and stuff. And you can see, for Jesus, it was a very real thing. But gates of hell is also an idiom, a simple Hebraic idiom for the powers of evil, powers of darkness. And very likely that is part of how we're supposed to read this. Hell can throw all of its offensive power at the church, and the church, big C, not merely Linden, cannot be destroyed by the powers of hell. My question is that all that Jesus is saying about the gates of hell? What if we read the gates of hell a little less abstract and a little more exact from the time period that Jesus is living in? Gates of cities and strongholds, they were your community's last line of defense. Your enemy shows up, everybody lives kind of outside the city except royalty and the aristocracy. Your enemy show up, everybody runs into the city, you shut the gates and you try to outlast your enemy. And you open the gates only when you're ready to go on the offensive. So, think of, for instance, the gates of Troy, the city of Troy. 10 years, Agamemnon and his men cannot get through the gates until Odysseus comes up with the Trojan horse idea, and then they get through the gates, and Troy falls like that. Because gates are your last line of defense. As long as your gates hold or prevail, that power can exist. And Jesus uses this language. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. Maybe that means offensively they can throw anything that they want at the church and the church can outlast them. But also, maybe it means the church is supposed to go on the offensive, like Jesus is doing in this scene, in acting it out. You're supposed to storm the gates of hell, knock their walls over, break their gates, overrun them until their power is broken. That's how the church actually wins, by being on the offensive, not sitting around waiting for somebody else to do the work. So, church, is Linden on the offensive? Or are we on the defensive? Are we hiding inside of our walls with our doors closed, our gates locked, and hoping that nobody gets us here until we live out our days in peace and harmony? Or are we going on the offensive and saying, where do we think evil is the most? And saying, let's go there. Let's tell people about Jesus. Let's tell the truth in all of these spaces where lies are told. And let's see people set free from these powers of hell and darkness. Call them whatever you want. Identify where you think the most hell on earth is in your life and get up and go on the offensive. Now, we're going to talk next week about how and what that looks like and more. But can you this week think about that, dwell on that, and ask yourself, am I, like Jesus, going on the offensive? Do I even know where I think hell is in my life? And what am I going to do about it? If I believe that he's the Messiah the same way Peter is, and I'm invested with the same authority that Peter is, what am I going to get up and do? That's the question that you need to think about this week. And you can answer it for yourself. And when you have, we need to get together and we need to discuss it as a church and saying, okay, you know what you're doing in your life, I know what I'm doing in my life, these people know what they're doing in their lives. What are we doing together collectively as a community to break down darkness here in the greater Kansas City Northlands? And we need to figure it out, we need to come up with a plan, and we need to stick with it for 20 or 30 more years without changing the plan too much. I challenge you to ask the questions and start thinking about how you're going to answer it. Because one day, God is going to ask you the same questions. What did you do with all the power that I gave you? What did you do with the authority over evil? I sat in my church and I made sure the music was what I wanted. I made sure that I was comfortable. I made sure the air was turned on and turned down so I didn't sweat. But as we're going to see next week, the way that you have to operate is you have to live sacrificially and give up the things that you want to properly use the power. So as you're asking yourselves the question, as you're thinking about this week, contextualize and saying, how am I living sacrificially? Or how am I not and need to? That will tell you how you're going to fight this battle.